Herrschers are the ultimate manifestation of the Honkai. Powerful beings that awaken when a Herrscher Core solidifies or is manually implanted inside the body of a vessel. A vessel must be someone with extremely high Honkai resistance to withstand the large amount of Honkai energy needed to form a core. Herrschers are capable of bending the physical laws and represent the greatest threat imposed by the Honkai. If left unchecked, a Herrscher has the power to wipe out human civilization. Hello beautiful people, today we are talking about the biggest threat a civilization could face. Herrschers. If you're interested in learning more about the Honkai, after you finish this video you can go watch the previous parts of this series dedicated to explaining everything we know about the Honkai. The first part covers the origins of Honkai and the imaginary tree, the second one covers everything we know about the wheel of Honkai, and this is the third part, about the Herrschers. Links are down in the description. Anyhow, let's get back to the main topic. Herrschers. Who are they? How do they appear? What's their purpose? And most importantly, why is your wallet empty every time a new one appears?
This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently. That's okay.
To better understand what they are and how their power works, it's necessary to go back to the word's roots. Herrscher is the German word for ruler, sovereign or monarch. Herrscher of the Void, Herrscher of Thunder, Herrscher of Reason. Their names are meant to represent that they are absolute rulers over their respective ability or whatever concept is tied to their core. As far as we know, Herrschers can form in multiple ways. Usually, a Herrscher awakens when a host is exposed to a large amount of Honkai energy and a Herrscher Core solidifies inside their bodies. The best example of this is Sirin, who awakened as a Herrscher after she absorbed the Honkai energy from the Honkai reactors inside the Babylon towers. She did not become a Herrscher because Ado experimented on her. This is false and a misconception I see a lot. Ado's purpose was to create artificial stigmata for the Valkyries, not to create Herrschers. Sirin became a Herrscher because of her high Honkai adaptability and because the wheel of Honkai guided her to absorb the Honkai energy from the Honkai reactors inside the tower. The experiments she has gone through have nothing to do with her being a Herrscher, besides the fact that they cemented a deep hatred towards humankind inside her that fueled her desire for revenge. Another way is by artificially implanting a Herrscher Core through surgery or other means. Examples of these are May and Wendy. It is important to note that a Herrscher Core cannot be implanted randomly in anybody. Much like natural Herrschers, the vessel in which the Herrscher Core is implanted needs to have high Honkai adaptability. Otherwise, the vast amount of energy will infect and kill its host. This leads me to another misconception I often hear, and that is the fact that a gem is an inferior version of a Herrscher Core. That is a false perception that is so deeply ingrained in the collective mentality of the Honkai community that even the Honkai Impact 3rd wiki page shows this information wrong. Then again, they show a lot of informations wrong. So let me end all the debates and finally give you a clear answer. What's the difference between a gem and a Herrscher Core? Well, in simple terms, absolutely nothing. Yeah, you heard me right, there's absolutely no difference between a core and a gem. Actually, there are a few differences, but they are not what you might be thinking of. As we all know, a Herrscher Core is the source of power for a Herrscher, and it's named after the power that the respective Herrscher controls. They also serve as faucets that draw out Honkai energy from the imaginary space. Herrscher gems, on the other hand, are exactly the same, but they were directly given to Sirin by the Wheel of Honkai during the second eruption. There is no hint in any Honkai impacted related material, external or not, that gems would be an inferior versions of the cores. This misconception might have emerged because some characters that had gems implanted in them, such as Wendy and pre-chapter 17 Mei, seemed weaker than the other Herrschers that had proper cores. But that is not because they had a gem, it's because they did not have fully mastered their powers yet. When Mei reawakens as the Herrscher of Thunder, Kevin tells her that the Gem of Conquest inside Kiana will dissolve and reform as a core inside Mei. This happens because a vessel forms a link with the imaginary tree when they become a Herrscher. So, Mei was connected to the imaginary tree through the Gem of Conquest, regardless if she had the gem in her possession or not. The gem reforming as a core inside Mei further shows that there is no inherent difference between the two. It's called a core now because it reappeared inside Mei's body, not because it became stronger. Another example would be Kiana herself. She doesn't have the core of fire. She got her powers from the Gem of Haste. And as we all can see, the Gem of Haste did not evolve into a core at any point. It's still the Gem of Haste, and Kiana is not weaker because of that. So, a quick recap. There is no inherent difference between a Herrscher Core and the 4 gems given to Sirin by the Wheel of Honkai. The 4 gems were actually named by the Honkai itself. That's why they are called gems. This does not imply that they are weaker than regular cores. Now, have you ever wished that you could become a Herrscher? Well, seek no more. Right now you can become the Herrscher of Subscribe. All you have to do is give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. It takes a really long time and effort to make these videos, and I would greatly appreciate if you'd consider subscribing. So, don't waste any time, become the Herrscher of Subscribe right now. An interesting aspect of the current era Herrscher cores is the fact that unlike their previous era counterparts, they are considered to be alive. We learn in chapter 26 that the current era Herrscher cores can change their properties even after they are removed from the body of a Herrscher. This implies that the core can be passed to another vessel after a Herrscher is killed or the core is removed. In the previous era, such a thing was impossible due to the nature of the singularity formed inside the core. Note that singularity is a fancy term that describes the actual point in a Herrscher core that draws out the Honkai energy from the imaginary space. Dr. Mei created the Divine Keys with the previous era Herrscher cores because they couldn't be passed to another person like in the current era, so that was the best way she could put them to use. That is why in chapter 26, the last core of domination went missing between dimensions searching for a new vessel. To lure it out, Otto created a Solium clone of himself in which he implanted his memories from 1491, right after he won the Schicksal Civil War and he was at his lowest point. Otto used this strange property of the current era Herrscher cores to bait the last core of domination into a host it could not refuse. In the process of becoming a Herrscher, the host will be opposed by what is called a Herrscher Persona, a consciousness that seems to be a split personality or some kind of new personality based on the vessel that is part of the core and tries to take over the body of the vessel. The conditions in which a Herrscher Persona forms can be different from Herrschers to Herrschers. Take Sirin for example. We know that she was guided by the Wheel of the Honkai to awaken as a Herrscher, but we never saw any Herrscher Persona within her. There is also the Herrscher of Sentience. When the Herrscher Persona first awakened inside Fuhua's body, it was so overwhelmed by her memories that it failed to realize its own identity as a Herrscher. Fuhua's influence was so big that even after realizing, she still chose to fight against the influence of the Honkai. In most cases, the human host will lose control eventually. We see this with Mei and Anna. Both fought hard to suppress their Herrscher personas. As Mei noted in chapter 18, the fact that Anna was fighting the Herrscher persona put her in a vegetative state and made her powers weaker. Mei didn't master her own Herrscher powers until the Herrscher persona inside her stopped resisting and left her in control of the core. This implies that the actual reason why we see some Herrschers being weaker than others is that the vessel fights for control over the body and powers with the Herrscher persona. We see the same with Kiana and HOV. It was never that Kiana couldn't master the powers of the void, it was because of the resistance put up by the other persona inside her that she could never tap into the full power of the core. Due to the records left by the previous era, we know that there are 14 Herrschers within the Honkai impacted universe. The current era seems to follow the same pattern as the previous era, with slight changes in the order they appear. That is not to be said that there can be more Herrschers, but at least the Honkai impacted universe seem to follow a fixed pattern. The current era Herrschers have the same abilities as their previous era counterparts, with some alterations to make them more suited for the new environment. As more and more Herrschers are born, these alterations grow bigger. Take the Herrscher of Domination from the current era. It manifested itself very differently from its previous era counterpart, and it even had some abilities that the previous era Herrscher of Dominance did not have. One of those abilities was to steal Herrscher powers from other Herrschers. It got this ability as it adapted to the current era, where many Herrschers fight for humanity. In the previous era, there was no such thing, so this kind of ability was useless. In the current era, there are still some Herrschers that have not appeared yet. Among them is the Herrscher of Death. Even though Kiana has the Gem of Serenity, she has limited mastery over it, and even if Cele has the Herrscher of Death stigmata, she has not awakened as a Herrscher yet. We are also missing the Herrscher of Binding, and no, Aro is not the Herrscher of Binding. From my understanding of chapter 28, the Wheel of Honkai only granted him authority over the power of binding, but as Teresa mentioned, no actual core has appeared. The Herrscher of Corruption, and no, Sakura does not count. The only Herrscher that we know nothing about and whose identity is still unknown is the third team.
Hi. Ohayo.
Wait, what are you doing here?
甘いスイーツは甘い女の子に似合うと思わない?
Hey, you're not supposed to be here. Oh man, she sure loves showing off. Almost like she's the Herrscher of Love or something.
到了吧。不过，在你真正来到第13律者面前时，嗨，感觉如何？
And lastly, the final Herrscher, the destroyer of worlds, the one that caused the doom of the previous era and probably the last and biggest threat our characters must face. I will point this out since many people commented on my previous videos. Yes, I know, she was never referred to as the Herrscher of the End in official materials. She was always referred to as the final Herrscher. Her name implies that there were no other Herrschers after her, since she managed to destroy human civilization. Herrschers are some of the most important beings in the honkaiverse. Every time one appears, the community is hype and celebrates because people know that they will bring great changes for both the story and the meta.